Dr. Kara Mitchell eased into her first-class seat, exhaling deeply as she allowed herself a rare moment of peace. For the first time in what felt like forever, she could finally let the relentless pressure of her job slip away. The cabin lights cast a warm glow over her deep brown skin as she tucked her handbag beneath her seat and adjusted her neatly pressed navy blue blouse. This brief pause, this small escape, was her reward, a long overdue break she'd fought to carve out of her packed schedule. Outside the window, the Chicago skyline faded into the distance as the plane prepared for takeoff. Kara thought of the people who had driven her to reach this point. Memories of her childhood flooding her mind. She'd grown up on the South Side, the daughter of a librarian who instilled a love of learning and a paramedic who showed her the importance of resilience. Her path had been anything but easy, filled with long nights studying under dim lights, pushing herself through med school with a fierce determination to succeed. At just 35, Kara had become one of the most prominent trauma surgeons at Lake Shore Medical Center. Her colleagues, practically forcing her onto the plane, had all but pushed her out the hospital doors. "Get some rest, Dr. Mitchell," they had urged. "The surgeries will still be here when you return." But the weight of her patients' lives lingered, tugging at her conscience. She'd left a stack of cases behind, a mental ledger of the lives she'd mended and the ones still hanging in the balance. Yet, for this brief interlude, she could let it go. She could just be Kara Mitchell. Not Dr. Mitchell, not the trauma surgeon constantly on call. She glanced around the cabin, noticing the quiet glances from a few fellow passengers. Some smiled politely, but others looked with mild surprise, as if taken aback to see her, a young black woman settling comfortably into a first-class seat. Kara returned their gazes with an unbothered smile. Used to these silent assessments, she'd learned long ago that her presence in spaces like these often sparked quiet, questioning looks, and she no longer felt the need to explain herself. She was here, and she belonged. As she closed her eyes, letting the hum of the cabin wash over her, a thud broke the tranquility. She opened her eyes to see a man, red-faced and flustered, struggling to fit an oversized briefcase into the overhead bin. He muttered to himself, frustration twisting his features as he shoved the bag, attempting to force it into a space it clearly wasn't meant to occupy. "Would you like a hand with that?" Kara offered gently, her voice calm. She was already leaning forward, her instincts to assist kicking in almost reflexively. The man turned, barely glancing at her before snapping, "I can handle it." His tone was tight with irritation, but Kara held her composure. Leaning back into her seat, she felt a twinge of annoyance but let it pass, watching as a flight attendant stepped forward. "Sir, I'm afraid that bag won't fit overhead. We'll need to check it," the attendant said patiently. The man's face turned a deeper shade of red. "This is absurd. I always fly first class. And this bag has never been an issue." He huffed, but after a moment, reluctantly handed over the bag. He dropped into the seat beside Kara with a huff, muttering to himself, "First class is going downhill." Kara smiled politely. "Sometimes it feels that way. But they're just doing their job." He turned to her, a slight sneer on his face. "And what would you know about doing the job? Are you a safety expert?" His words stung, and for a moment, Kara felt the all-too-familiar twinge of frustration. "Actually, I'm Dr. Kara Mitchell, trauma surgeon," she replied, her tone cool but firm. The man paused, his gaze shifting, clearly taken aback by her response. He extended a hand, hesitantly. "Mark Elliott, CEO of Ellis Developments." Kara nodded, shaking his hand briefly before looking away, hoping the conversation might end there. The plane began to taxi to the runway, the low hum of the engines filling the cabin. But Mark, apparently intrigued, continued, "So, a trauma surgeon?" he asked, skepticism lacing his words. "What kind of emergencies do you handle?" Kara fought the urge to sigh. "Accidents, critical injuries, emergency procedures, everything people don't expect but still need prepared hands for," she replied, her tone professional but distant. Mark smirked, as if her answer amused him. Quite impressive, for someone so young. Kara's jaw tightened slightly, but she kept her voice level. "I've been in practice for nearly a decade, And I completed my training at Lakeshore Medical Center, she said, a note of pride slipping into her voice. Mark's response was a nonchalant shrug. San Diego for a vacation. Then? Self-care, I guess. He chuckled, his tone dismissive. Kara was about to answer when a commotion erupted a few rows ahead, drawing both of their attention. As she watched the man in the aisle slump forward, gasping for air, Kara felt a shift within her. In an instant, she was no longer the tired doctor craving rest. She was the surgeon ready to save a life. The air in the cabin felt suddenly dense as Kara's instincts took over. She unbuckled her seatbelt, rising to her feet even as Mark's skeptical voice faded behind her. Pushing past the shocked faces, she navigated the narrow aisle to where the man had slumped, gasping, his wide eyes darting in panic. Sweat beaded on his pale forehead, and his trembling hand clutched his chest. Kara knew the signs, she had seen them more times than she could count. I'm a doctor, please let me through, she announced, her voice calm yet commanding. The passengers parted, stunned into silence, as Kara knelt beside the man, already assessing his condition. His labored breaths came fast and shallow, his face a shade too close to gray. She placed a hand on his shoulder, speaking softly, Sir, try to take a slow breath. Help is here. The flight attendants, now wide-eyed but attentive, looked to her for instruction. I need the first aid kit and any heart medication you have, aspirin or nitroglycerin, she directed, her voice steady. The hum of the engines faded into the background as the urgency of the situation narrowed her focus. A flight attendant returned with the first aid kit, her hands trembling slightly. Kara took the kit, extracting a small packet of aspirin and offering the man a tablet. This will help thin your blood. Chew it slowly, okay? The man nodded weakly, his breath shallow but growing steadier as he chewed the aspirin. Kara kept her hand on his shoulder, offering steady reassurance as she checked his pulse. Behind her, a soft murmur of voices began to ripple through the cabin. She glanced over her shoulder to see Mark. His expression transformed from mild irritation to astonished silence as he watched her work. Just then, a woman with soft eyes and a calm demeanor stepped forward, her badge identifying her as a nurse. She knelt beside Kara, nodding respectfully. I'm a nurse, let me know how I can help. Thank you, Kara replied, grateful for the support. Let's check his vitals together. I think he's having a cardiac episode, but we're stabilizing him. With practiced ease, they worked in tandem, securing an oxygen mask over the man's face and checking his pulse. Kara murmured calming words to him as his breathing slowed, his hand relaxing from his chest. The worst of the danger seemed to have passed. Once his condition had stabilized, Kara took a step back, releasing a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. The cabin, which had been buzzing with anxious whispers, fell silent as the passengers looked on, clearly impressed. Applause broke out across the rows, hesitant at first, then building in genuine appreciation. Kara returned to her seat, her adrenaline ebbing but her mind still racing. She hadn't anticipated a life-or-death situation on her vacation flight. But somehow, she felt even more at ease. There was comfort in knowing that, when needed, she could step up even here. At 35,000 feet, Mark shifted in his seat as she sat down, his gaze avoiding hers for a moment before he cleared his throat awkwardly. Dr. Mitchell, I didn't realize, he began, his voice softer than before, tinged with an unfamiliar note of humility. I was out of line. Kara glanced at him, her calm, level gaze meeting his. She knew that her words, whatever she chose to say, could either deepen his awareness or let him brush it off. She took a steadying breath. Maybe next time, think before assuming, she said quietly, her tone not unkind but firm. Mark nodded, visibly uncomfortable but thoughtful. For the rest of the flight, he remained silent, his earlier smugness replaced by something else, a look that Kara recognized. It was the look of a man confronted with his own prejudices, forced to see beyond his narrow expectations. As the plane cruised toward San Diego, Kara felt a strange sense of satisfaction settle over her. She had come here seeking peace and distance from her work. Yet somehow, the work had followed her, manifesting not only in saving a life but also Perhaps, in nudging a stubborn stranger toward change. Her gaze drifted toward the window, where clouds brushed past like silent specters. And she let herself savor the quiet moment. She had done her duty. As she always did, whether in the controlled chaos of an or the unlikely confines of an airplane cabin. And in doing so, she'd reminded herself of why she chose this path in the first place. As the plane settled into a quiet rhythm, Kara leaned back, her pulse gradually slowing after the adrenaline rush. The other passengers had returned to their conversations and their screens, but a few cast lingering, admiring glances her way. She noticed Mark shifting beside her, glancing at her with what seemed like both discomfort and a newfound respect. After a long silence, he finally spoke. "So, that's the kind of thing you handle every day, then?" Kara glanced at him, her expression neutral. She had seen this before, the transformation in people who had their preconceived notions challenged. There was a softening, a subtle discomfort that came from realizing they'd misjudged her, but also a curiosity. "Yes," she replied simply, "and much more." Mark's brow furrowed as he processed this. "I can't imagine how many lives you've saved," he murmured, more to himself than to her. He leaned back, his eyes lost in thought. "I don't think I could handle it, the pressure." "I mean," Kara allowed herself a small smile, glancing down at the stethoscope she always kept in her bag, a symbol of both her responsibility and her pride. "It's what I trained for. You adapt. Every call, every crisis, you find a way to focus on the moment. There isn't time to think about the rest." He gave a slow nod, as if finally understanding a piece of the world she lived in. A world so different from his own. After a pause, he looked over at her, something hesitant in his eyes. "I owe you an apology. For earlier." Kara's eyes softened slightly, and she could sense the sincerity behind his words. "Why did you assume I was less?" she asked, her voice gentle but pointed. She was not trying to be harsh, but she needed to know. Mark hesitated, visibly uncomfortable, and then sighed. "I suppose I've just never seen a woman like you, someone so young. A black woman in first class. Let alone in your profession. I didn't even consider. I didn't think." He trailed off, his gaze dropping as he realized how hollow his words sounded. Even to himself. Kara held his gaze, offering him the space to confront the truth of his biases. "It's easier to judge someone when you know nothing about them," she said, her tone unwavering but kind. "Maybe now you'll think twice before making those assumptions." He gave a slight nod, his expression humbled. "You're right, I will." There was something in his eyes, an honesty that seemed to surprise even him. For the rest of the flight, the two sat in a companionable silence, Mark lost in thought while Kara allowed herself to close her eyes, finally embracing the peace she had sought from the beginning. When the flight finally touched down in San Diego, Mark turned to her one last time as they prepared to disembark. "Dr. Mitchell, I don't know if this means anything, but thank you for everything. I have some thinking to do." Kara met his gaze with a quiet smile, feeling the weight of the interaction lift. "I hope you do," she replied simply, her voice filled with both warmth and resolve. As they stepped out of the plane and into the warm California air, Kara felt a sense of accomplishment beyond her typical day's work. She hadn't only saved a life on that flight, she had perhaps sparked something in Mark, a ripple of change. A question that might grow into something more. Walking out into the sunlight, she knew she had done what she set out to do, not just as a doctor but as a person who believed in the power of every encounter to reshape understanding. One step at a time. Kara lingered in the airport's arrival terminal, savoring the warmth and brightness of the San Diego sunlight streaming through the glass. She rolled her shoulders, trying to let the last traces of tension from the flight dissolve. But the encounter with Mark stayed with her, leaving her with a feeling that something more had shifted than just his perspective. As she stepped onto the airport shuttle, she noticed a familiar figure approaching from across the terminal. Mark Elliott walked with a purposeful stride, his expression earnest and a bit vulnerable, a stark contrast to the self-assured CEO she'd first encountered. He caught her eye and offered a tentative wave. "Kara," he called out, foregoing any formalities, as if they'd somehow crossed from strangers to allies within those hours in the sky. "Do you have a moment?" She paused, surprised but intrigued. Yes, I do. What's on your mind? Mark hesitated, his gaze shifting to the floor before he looked back at her. I thought about what you said about assumptions. And it hit me hard. I've spent so much of my life moving through the world in a bubble, thinking I know people because of a title or a first impression. He rubbed the back of his neck, his voice dropping. You opened my eyes to how limited that thinking is. Kara studied him, sensing the vulnerability in his voice. It was clear that the experience had forced him to confront himself in a way he hadn't expected. She softened, allowing a small smile. It takes courage to recognize when we're wrong. Most people don't ever reach that point. He gave a faint smile, a flash of the man she had glimpsed beneath the arrogance. Honestly, I think I've spent so much time around people who think like me, who look like me, that I forgot there's a world beyond my comfort zone. When I saw you, I made assumptions I wasn't even conscious of. But they were there all the same. Kara nodded slowly, absorbing his words. We all have blind spots, Mark. The key is what we choose to do once we recognize them. They stood in a small pocket of quiet amid the bustling terminal, their conversation feeling private, even intimate. Mark took a deep breath, glancing away as if gathering his thoughts. You know, I've spent years building my company, overseeing everything from the top down. But after this, I'm starting to wonder, what am I really doing with it? What am I teaching my employees if I'm setting this kind of example? Kara tilted her head, her curiosity piqued. What would you want to change? He hesitated, but there was a new spark in his eyes. I want to build something more than just a business. I want a culture that's open, where people don't feel like they have to fight to be taken seriously or prove their worth just because they don't look the part. I think I'd like to start with myself and maybe make some changes at Ellis Developments. Kara's expression softened. She could see he was genuine, that his experience on the plane had left a lasting impact. That's a powerful vision, Mark. Change starts at the top. But it's never easy. Are you ready for that kind of challenge? Mark gave her a steady look, a hint of resolve returning to his posture. If I could start over in my company, I would. But maybe I can start by being better, by encouraging empathy, openness, and understanding among my team. It's the least I can do. After realizing how blind I've been, Kara extended her hand, and he took it, shaking it firmly, their handshake symbolic of an unspoken agreement. Then I wish you luck, Mark. Real change doesn't happen overnight, but you've taken the first step. As they parted ways, Kara watched him disappear into the crowd, a man on a mission that he hadn't anticipated but that now seemed to give him purpose. She turned to leave, her heart a little lighter, feeling as if she'd planted a seed that might just grow into something meaningful. Walking out of the terminal, Kara felt the California breeze play with her hair, filling her with a renewed sense of purpose. This vacation was meant to be her escape from the pressure and demands of her work. But now, she realized it had become something more. Her journey was about more than saving lives in the air. It was about inspiring others to look beyond their biases, to see people for who they truly were. As she stepped out into the warm afternoon sun, Kara felt a quiet sense of fulfillment. She had sparked a change not just in Mark, but in herself. She knew that every encounter, no matter how brief or unlikely, held the potential to reshape the way someone saw the world. And for her, that was the true measure of her work's worth. The next morning, Kara settled into a cozy cafe near the ocean, enjoying her first sip of coffee as she took in the view. The warmth of the sun and the gentle crash of waves felt like a welcome contrast to her usual fast-paced environment. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to be fully present, savoring the simple beauty around her. Just as she opened her book, her phone buzzed. She glanced down, surprised to see a message from an unfamiliar number. Good morning, Dr. Mitchell. This is Mark Elliott. I hope I'm not disturbing your peace. But I wanted to thank you once again. You've given me a lot to think about. I don't know if you'd be interested, but I'd love to discuss a project I'm considering. No pressure, just an idea. Kara stared at the screen, surprised. She had expected her encounter with Mark to end when they'd parted ways at the airport. But here he was, reaching out, clearly affected by the events of the flight. She replied with a smile. Good morning, Mark. I appreciate the message. I'm interested to hear about your idea. Let's meet later today. They arranged to meet at a quiet spot by the beach. A place that seemed far removed from their previous surroundings. Mark arrived, dressed casually, with a humility in his posture that Kara hadn't seen before. He greeted her with a warm smile, clearly pleased she'd agreed to meet. Thanks for coming, he began, taking a seat across from her. I realize I've done a lot of talking about change, but I want to actually make it happen. That's where I hoped you might come in. Intrigued, Kara leaned forward. What kind of change are you envisioning? He took a deep breath, gathering his thoughts. After our conversation, I started thinking about how closed off my company culture has become. We're successful, sure, but we're missing something: perspective, diversity, real empathy. I want to create a program that not only fosters diversity but actively nurtures it. Kara's brow furrowed with curiosity. That sounds ambitious. What do you have in mind? Mark smiled, a hint of nervous excitement in his expression. I'd like to establish a mentorship program where professionals from various backgrounds, especially those who might not traditionally have access to resources, could receive guidance and support to excel in the corporate world. I'd like to start it at Ellis Developments but expand it over time. And I was hoping you might be willing to serve as an advisor. You're the reason I even had this idea. Kara's heart swelled at the thought, and she was touched by his sincerity. I'm flattered, Mark, but I'm a surgeon, not a corporate consultant. Mark nodded, understanding her hesitation. I know, but your insights changed me in ways I didn't expect. I think the perspective you bring, the ability to see beyond surface judgments, could be invaluable. I want to show others what I learned from you in just a few hours on that plane. Kara looked out at the ocean, weighing his words. The idea was bold, but there was something about it that resonated deeply. She knew what it felt like to be underestimated, to feel like she had to prove her worth in spaces that weren't designed with her in mind. If there was a way to create opportunities for others who faced those same obstacles, it was a cause she could believe in. After a pause, she turned back to him, her expression thoughtful. Mark, if I were to help, I'd want this program to be more than just a diversity initiative on paper. It would have to truly prioritize voices that haven't been heard. Give people a place where they can thrive and grow authentically. Real change only happens when it's deep and meaningful. Mark's eyes lit up, a mixture of relief and excitement. That's exactly what I want. I don't just want to make a statement. I want to build something sustainable that leaves a lasting impact. Kara felt a spark of inspiration ignite within her, a sense of purpose she hadn't expected to find on this trip. All right, Mark, I'll help, but only if we're fully committed to making this a true reflection of growth. Not just a quick fix. They shook hands, sealing an unexpected partnership that had blossomed from a chance encounter at 35,000 feet. Kara could see the potential for change, not only in Mark's company but in the industry as a whole. She felt energized, her mind racing with ideas on how they could create something transformative. As they walked along the beach, discussing the details of their plan, Kara felt a new excitement, a sense that she was embarking on a mission that could ripple outward, touching lives far beyond her usual sphere of influence. For so long, her focus had been on saving lives in the earth. But now, she realized, there were other ways to heal, to nurture, to inspire. By the time they parted ways, Kara had a newfound sense of purpose, and Mark had a clear path forward. They each knew that what they were building wasn't just a program, it was a step toward a broader understanding. A bridge to a more inclusive future. As she watched him disappear into the distance, Kara turned back to the waves, feeling a peace she hadn't anticipated. Her journey had taken a detour, but it was one that felt profoundly right. She had been given a chance to not only touch lives through her hands but to leave a mark that would ripple through generations, a legacy of compassion, understanding, and true change. Kara sat on the terrace of her beachfront rental, gazing out over the horizon as the sun dipped lower, casting the sky in hues of pink and amber. Her mind buzzed with thoughts of the mentorship program, which had quickly become a vision with substance after her conversation with Mark. It was an opportunity she hadn't seen coming, a chance to contribute to change in a world she rarely intersected with but now felt inexplicably drawn to. Later that evening, Kara received a notification on her phone. Mark had sent her a draft proposal for the program, outlining potential steps, budget considerations, and ideas for outreach. She couldn't help but be impressed by the thought he'd put into it. The way he'd laid out his goals and objectives. This was a man who had come a long way in just a few days. Humbled by the realization of his own biases and determined to make things right. She smiled, feeling a quiet pride that her presence had ignited this in him. The next morning, Mark invited her to meet with a few of his colleagues who would be instrumental in getting the mentorship program off the ground. Kara agreed, and they decided to gather at a conference room in a sleek high-rise overlooking downtown San Diego. She arrived early, reviewing her notes and preparing to meet a side of corporate America she seldom encountered. The room filled slowly, and Kara felt the eyes of Mark's team on her as they entered. Each one sizing up the unexpected guest with a mix of curiosity and, perhaps, skepticism. She held her head high, her calm professionalism winning over any nerves she might have felt. Mark opened the meeting, explaining the purpose of the gathering and introducing Kara as his advisor. He shared the story of their encounter, giving her credit for the insight that led him to reevaluate his approach to leadership. The looks in the room shifted from intrigue to respect, and Kara could sense that her presence was already starting to challenge expectations. When it was her turn to speak, she stood, her voice clear and steady. "I'm not here as a corporate strategist. I'm a trauma surgeon, and my world is very different from yours. But there's one thing our fields have in common: a need for empathy, respect, and fairness. Those qualities aren't just important in medicine, they're essential to any environment where people work, grow, and succeed." She could see her words resonating, the faces around her shifting as they absorbed her perspective. She outlined her vision for the mentorship program, emphasizing the importance of providing real opportunities, especially to those who had historically been marginalized or overlooked. "It's not enough to open the door," she continued. "We have to create a space where people feel welcome and empowered. Real change doesn't happen when we check a box. It happens when we commit to transforming the environment from the inside out." The room was quiet as she finished, her words hanging in the air. Mark's colleagues seemed thoughtful, many of them nodding, others clearly inspired. Mark spoke up, his voice firm. "We've all been taught to work hard, to strive for success. But this program is about more than success. It's about recognizing our role in creating a space where everyone can thrive." One of Mark's senior executives, a woman named Helen, raised her hand. "I think this is exactly what we need. I've seen the effects of unchecked bias in our industry, and I believe this kind of initiative could set a powerful example." Another executive, a man named Peter, looked at Kara with newfound respect. "Dr. Mitchell, your perspective is refreshing. You make us see things we take for granted. This program could be revolutionary." Kara nodded, feeling a surge of optimism. For so long, her impact had been measured by the lives she saved in surgery. But now she realized there were other ways to heal. "It's easy to get lost in our routines, in the narrow circles we operate within," she replied. "But real growth happens when we're willing to see beyond those circles." The meeting continued, ideas flowing back and forth, and Kara felt a sense of purpose that surprised her. The group discussed outreach initiatives, mentorship structures, and ways to foster inclusion, and each idea felt like a new brick in the foundation they were building. As they wrapped up, Mark walked her to the elevator, gratitude evident in his eyes. "Thank you, Kara. I know this is outside your comfort zone, but you've inspired everyone here today. You've made us look at ourselves in a way we never have before." She smiled, a quiet satisfaction settling over her. "Thank you, Mark. This is a partnership I hadn't expected, but it's one I believe in. You have the chance to do something remarkable here, to set a precedent, to change an entire culture." They shook hands, and as she left the building, Kara felt a newfound energy propelling her forward. This vacation, meant to be a break from her world, had turned into a mission to transform another. She had always seen her career as a doctor as her sole calling. But now, she was beginning to wonder if life had more in store. Walking down the busy streets of San Diego, she felt a glimmer of excitement for the future. She was still Dr. Kara Mitchell, But maybe, just maybe, there was room for something more, a new horizon where her influence extended beyond the operating room, touching lives in ways she had only begun to imagine. A few weeks later, Kara was back in Chicago, her regular life as a trauma surgeon resuming in full swing. She moved through the hospital with practiced ease, treating patients and managing critical cases with her usual expertise. Yet, every so often, her thoughts drifted to San Diego, to the mentorship program she had helped Mark envision. She wondered how it was progressing, whether the seeds they'd planted were taking root. Then one afternoon, as she was finishing up her rounds, an email from Mark arrived in her inbox. It was brief but packed with excitement. Subject: "We're live." Message: "Kara, we did it. The program launched today. I'd love for you to see it in action if you're free to visit sometime soon. Thank you. Again. This wouldn't exist without you." Kara smiled, feeling a surge of pride and anticipation. Later that evening, she replied, agreeing to visit the program in person. Mark's invitation had awakened a curiosity in her, a need to see the impact of her contribution firsthand. A few days later, she found herself back on a plane, this time headed to San Diego, not for a vacation but for a purpose she hadn't imagined at the start of her trip. She arrived at the office early, and Mark greeted her in the lobby with a wide smile. His demeanor transformed. It was the look of a man who had found something beyond mere success. He'd found meaning. "Kara, it's incredible," he said as he led her toward the program's new space. An entire floor dedicated to training, mentorship, and community building activities. The walls were adorned with photographs and quotes from diverse leaders, each one representing a voice, a journey, a story of resilience and triumph. The space was open, bright, and welcoming, exuding a sense of inclusion and purpose. "We have 20 participants in this first group," Mark explained as they entered the main area. People from all walks of life, different backgrounds, each one bringing a unique perspective. They're learning from each other. And honestly, we're learning from them. Kara's gaze traveled across the room, landing on clusters of people deep in discussion. Some animated, others quiet and reflective. She noticed a young woman standing in front of a projector screen, presenting confidently to a small audience. There was a sense of excitement in the air, the energy palpable. As they moved further into the space, Mark introduced her to some of the program's participants, each story leaving Kara both inspired and humbled. There was Carlos, a first-generation college graduate eager to break into corporate leadership, Aisha, a former teacher seeking a new path, and Ethan, a young man who had struggled with limited opportunities but now brimmed with potential and determination. One of the participants, a woman named Grace, approached Kara, her eyes bright with gratitude. "You must be Dr. Mitchell. Mark told us about you, about how you inspired all of this. I can't tell you how much it means to be here. This is an opportunity I never thought I'd have." Kara felt a lump in her throat. She hadn't anticipated the personal impact she'd have on these individuals, and it touched her deeply. "Thank you, Grace. I'm honored to meet you. Just remember, you're here because of your own strength, your own potential. I may have helped create the space, but you're the one who will make it your own." As the morning went on, Kara met more participants, each with a story that reinforced the importance of this program. What struck her most was the profound sense of belonging and hope that filled the room. These were individuals who, for the first time, were being seen and valued for their potential rather than judged by their backgrounds. After a tour, Mark led her into a smaller room set aside for a private conversation. He looked at her, a mixture of pride and gratitude in his eyes. "Kara, I can't thank you enough. Seeing this in action, seeing how it's already changing lives, it's more fulfilling than I ever could have imagined." She smiled, her heart full. "It's incredible, Mark. You took an idea and made it real. You created a place where people can thrive and grow." He nodded, a look of sincerity crossing his face. "This wouldn't have existed without you. Your words, your insight, they forced me to see what I was missing. This program isn't just about mentorship, it's about giving people the foundation they need to succeed, regardless of where they come from." Kara felt a deep sense of accomplishment, a satisfaction she rarely found outside of her work as a surgeon. In a way, This felt like healing two mending unseen wounds, giving people the tools to overcome barriers and reach for their dreams. As they left the room, Mark stopped her, an idea suddenly lighting up his face. We'd love to have you as a guest speaker sometime. Maybe even as a mentor. These participants could benefit so much from your perspective. Kara's eyes widened in surprise. She hadn't expected to be asked for such a role. But as she looked around the room, seeing the impact of the program, she felt a pull in her heart. I'd be honored, she said softly. If I can help inspire even one person, it would be worth it. The rest of the day passed in a blur of interactions, conversations, and smiles. Kara felt as if she were part of something larger than herself. A movement of change that extended beyond her daily life in the ER. By the time she left, saying her goodbyes to Mark and the program's participants, Kara felt a profound sense of purpose and hope. Her vacation had indeed become something greater, a journey that had led her to a place of unexpected influence and inspiration. As she boarded her flight back to Chicago, Kara reflected on the ripple of change she had helped set in motion. She might be returning to her regular life, but a part of her would remain here, a silent guide, encouraging each participant to rise above expectations and reach for the future they deserved. Back in Chicago, life at Lakeshore Medical resumed its relentless pace. But something had shifted within Kara. In the days following her return, she felt a new energy and undercurrent of fulfillment that transcended her usual routine. Each time she glanced at her stethoscope or put on her white coat, she was reminded of the ripples of change she'd helped create in San Diego. Her work in the ER was as demanding as ever, but now she carried the knowledge that her influence reached beyond the hospital walls. Late one evening, Kara sat in her office, reviewing patient charts. Her phone buzzed, and she saw an email from Mark. Its subject line simple but telling: "It's happening." Opening it, she found photos from the mentorship program, participants smiling, engaged in workshops, presenting confidently. Each image told a story, each face brimming with the hope and determination she had witnessed firsthand. Subject: "It's happening." Message: Kara, the program is growing faster than we could have imagined. We've had interest from other companies, and several participants are already being offered positions and internships. They're thriving. I can't thank you enough for your inspiration and guidance. She leaned back in her chair, a small smile touching her lips. She could almost hear the laughter, the exchange of ideas, the passion in the voices of those she'd met. Her heart swelled with pride, knowing the program had taken on a life of its own, a legacy of empathy, resilience, and growth. She had helped set it in motion, but now it was carried forward by those who were ready to change the world. As she gazed at the email, Kara felt a surge of gratitude for the journey that had begun with a single flight. A simple conversation that had evolved into something profound. She realized that healing wasn't limited to mending broken bones or treating injuries. It could mean bridging divides, inspiring change, and planting seeds of growth. The following week, Mark invited her to speak virtually at the program's first major event. A celebration of its success and a showcase of the participants' achievements. Standing in front of her laptop, she adjusted her camera, her heart beating with excitement. As she logged into the meeting, she was greeted by a gallery of faces, some familiar, others new. Mark smiled warmly from his screen, a reflection of the journey they had both undertaken. When it was her turn to speak, Kara took a deep breath, looking into the faces of those who now represented her vision. "Thank you all for letting me be a part of this journey," she began, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "This program isn't just about creating opportunities, it's about redefining what success looks like. It's about breaking down walls and lifting each other up. I've seen firsthand what you're capable of, and I am so proud of each one of you." The participants listened, their eyes bright with the determination that had brought them this far. "Remember," Kara continued, "your presence, your voice, it matters. The world may try to tell you otherwise, but you have the power to shape your future, to create change, and to inspire others. You've already started a movement, and it's only just beginning." When she finished, the virtual room erupted in applause. Kara's heart raced, filled with a sense of purpose that went beyond words. She could see the spark of possibility in each face, A promise that they would carry forward her message. Her belief in them, long after the screen turned dark. After the event, Mark sent her a simple message. "Thank you, Kara. You've left a mark that won't fade." And as she sat there, reflecting on the journey, Kara knew that she had found something more than success. She had found a legacy that would live on in the lives she had touched. A reminder that sometimes the smallest acts of courage could lead to the most extraordinary transformations. From that day forward, Kara carried the mentorship program with her. Not only in her mind but in her heart. A constant reminder of the power of compassion, resilience, and unity. And every time she stepped into the every time she saved a life, she did so with the knowledge that she had also helped to save dreams, break down barriers, and inspire hope. Her story had started as a journey to find rest, but it had become a testament to the impact one person could have when they chose to see beyond themselves. Kara's legacy, woven into the lives of those she had touched, was one of quiet courage and relentless empathy, a legacy that would grow, inspiring others long after she had left the room.